In this episode, we're going to focus on the kind of identity management that actually works for real people in cloud environments, rather than the imaginary version where everyone follows perfect rules forever. Beginners often picture identity management as a neat list of users and passwords, but in the cloud, identity is the foundation for almost everything, and the messiness of real organizations shows up immediately. People join and leave, roles change, contractors appear for short projects, devices come and go, and services need access without a human sitting there. If identity is handled with wishful thinking, like assuming nobody shares accounts or assuming every user understands security perfectly, the system will fail in predictable ways. The better approach is designing identity management so that the secure path is the easiest path, and so that mistakes and misuse have limited impact. End-user identity management is especially important because end users are the largest group of identities and are the most common target for attacks. The goal is to understand how to design identity practices that match cloud reality, reduce risk, and still let people get their work done. Before we continue, a quick note. This audio course is a companion to our course companion books. The first book is about the exam and provides detailed information on how to pass it best. The second book is a Kindle-only ebook that contains 1,000 flashcards that can be used on your mobile device or Kindle. Check them both out at cyberauthor.me in the Bare Metal Study Guide series. A useful way to define end-user identity management is the set of rules and processes that govern how real people authenticate and gain permissions to use cloud-connected services. This includes how accounts are created, how they are linked to real humans, how access is granted based on roles, and how access is removed when it is no longer needed. In cloud settings, end-user identity management often spans multiple systems because users might access cloud consoles, software applications, and shared services through the same identity. A key concept is that identity is not only authentication, which is proving who you are, but also authorization, which is deciding what you can do after you are authenticated. Many incidents happen because organizations focus heavily on the login step but leave authorization messy, with overly broad permissions or unclear ownership. A realistic identity program treats authentication and authorization as one connected story. Who is the user? What job do they have? What should they be able to do? And how do we prove those answers? That is the foundation of cloud identity management that fits reality. One cloud reality is that identity is a primary perimeter because network boundaries are less reliable than they were in older environments. In traditional settings, an organization might rely heavily on being inside the corporate network as a trust signal, but cloud services are accessible from many locations and are designed for remote access. That means identity controls must be strong enough to stand on their own, without assuming that being on a certain network automatically makes activity safe. It also means you should expect attackers to target identity directly through phishing, credential theft, and abuse of session tokens. If identity is weak, attackers may not need to exploit servers at all. They can simply sign in as someone else. A realistic identity management approach starts from this threat model. Assume credentials will be targeted and sometimes compromised, so design layers that reduce the chance and reduce the impact. That includes strong authentication, careful session handling, and tightly scoped permissions. Another cloud reality is that organizations often have multiple categories of end users, and they do not all need the same access. Employees, contractors, partners, and vendors may all interact with cloud-connected applications, but their trust level and needs differ. Wishful thinking treats all users the same and gives broad access because it is easier, but realistic identity management builds distinct user groups with different onboarding, approval, and access patterns. For example, contractors might need access for a limited period and only to a specific project, so their identity should be time-limited and their permissions should be tightly scoped. Partners might need access to a single application but not to administrative consoles, so their identity should be constrained to that path. Even within employees, different roles require different access, and not everyone should be treated like an administrator. Separating user categories reduces risk by narrowing what any single credential compromise can expose. It also improves clarity because access decisions become easier to explain and audit. Role design is one of the most practical parts of end-user identity management, and it is where wishful thinking often breaks down. A role is a bundle of permissions intended to match a job function, and good roles are shaped by what people actually do, not by what the organization wishes they would do. Beginners sometimes try to create one perfect role per job title, but job titles are not precise enough, and people often do multiple tasks that cross titles. A more realistic approach is creating roles based on common access patterns, such as read-only access for reporting, contributor access for specific resources, and administrative access for narrowly defined operations. Another realistic principle is that roles should be additive and composable, meaning a user can hold multiple roles that together match their needs, rather than one giant role that includes everything. This reduces the temptation to grant overly broad access just to avoid complexity. It also makes change easier because you can adjust one role without rebuilding the entire permission model. Least privilege is still the guiding idea, but applying it realistically means aiming for minimum necessary access with practical workflows for when people need more. Wishful thinking assumes people will never need temporary elevated access, so it either blocks work or leads to secret workarounds. A better approach recognizes that some tasks require higher privileges, but those privileges should be time-bound, approved, and visible. For example, a user might normally have standard access, but for a specific task they might need elevated permission for a short period, after which access returns to normal. This limits standing privilege, which is a major source of risk, because standing privilege turns a single stolen credential into a long-term powerful attacker identity. Realistic identity management makes elevation controlled and routine rather than rare and chaotic. When elevation is a normal, governed process, people are less likely to share accounts or store credentials in unsafe places to get work done. Another cloud reality is that end users often interact with cloud services indirectly through applications, not directly through administrative consoles. This matters because identity management must cover both types of access, and the risks differ. Console access is powerful and can change infrastructure, so it should be limited to a small set of users with clear justification. Application access is broader, but it still needs careful control because applications can expose sensitive data and actions. If you grant too much access to end users in application contexts, you may create data leakage risks, unauthorized changes, or privacy problems. Realistic identity management includes making sure application permissions match business responsibilities and that sensitive actions require stronger verification. It also includes making sure users understand which identity they are using and what it grants, because confusion can lead to accidental exposure. Clarity is a security control in itself, because confusion is a common path to mistakes. Account lifecycle management is another area where cloud reality punishes wishful thinking. Lifecycle includes onboarding, changes during employment, and offboarding, and it must be reliable because stale accounts are a major risk. When someone leaves an organization, their access should be removed quickly and completely, including access to cloud-connected applications and any lingering permissions. When someone changes roles, their access should change too, removing permissions they no longer need rather than only adding new ones. Wishful thinking assumes managers will remember every access change, but in real life managers are busy and access can be forgotten. Realistic identity management uses consistent processes and clear ownership so changes happen reliably. Evidence of lifecycle discipline also matters for audits because it proves that access decisions are controlled, not random. A closely related topic is identity hygiene, which includes practices that reduce confusion and improve accountability. Each user should have a unique identity, because shared accounts destroy traceability and make it hard to investigate incidents. Users should be encouraged to use approved authentication methods and avoid insecure shortcuts like storing credentials in unsafe locations. Naming conventions, group membership rules, and documentation of role assignments help keep the identity system understandable. In cloud environments, misunderstanding often leads to over-permissioning because teams grant broad rights to avoid breaking something they do not fully understand. Identity hygiene helps reduce that fear by making access structures clearer and more predictable. It also supports monitoring because normal behavior becomes easier to define when identities and roles are cleanly organized. This is one of those areas where good governance makes security easier rather than harder. Monitoring and review are essential because identity management is never finished, and cloud realities change faster than policies do. Access reviews help confirm that users still need the roles they have, and they help catch permission creep that accumulates over time. Behavioral monitoring helps detect compromised accounts by spotting unusual sign-ins, unusual locations, or unusual actions that do not match the user's typical role. Realistic identity management assumes some credentials will be targeted and some users will make mistakes, so detection and response are part of the design. Reviews also help validate that role design still matches how people work, because if roles are outdated, users will request exceptions or create workarounds. The goal is not to punish users, but to keep the system aligned with reality so secure behavior stays convenient. When identity management fits reality, users can do their work without fighting security, and security teams can trust that access decisions are meaningful. When you bring all these ideas together, building end-user identity management that fits cloud realities means designing for humans, change, and attackers at the same time. You treat identity as the primary perimeter, so you strengthen authentication and limit what a single credential can do. You separate user categories and design roles based on real work patterns, not idealized job titles. You apply least privilege realistically by controlling elevation rather than pretending it will never be needed. You keep console access limited, manage lifecycle changes reliably, and maintain identity hygiene so accountability and clarity remain strong. You add monitoring and review because drift and compromise are ongoing possibilities, not rare events. On the exam, this mindset helps you choose answers that emphasize practical governance, least privilege, and lifecycle discipline over simplistic rules. In real cloud environments, it builds a system where secure access is normal, misuse is easier to detect, and the organization is not relying on wishful thinking to protect its most important assets.
Thanks for listening. For more audio courses, daily newsletters, and more, please visit baremetalcyber.com.